Video, we're going to discover how the formulas of the derivatives of trigonometric functions were derived. So, kaya galing yung mga formulas natin na ginagamit sa derivative ng mga trigonometric functions. Okay, so these are the formulas for the derivatives of trigonometric function. Now we're going to start our derivation with the derivative of sine x with respect to x. How come the derivative of sine is equal to cosine? So let's see, paano kaya nangyari yun? So let's see. We recall the derivative formula using the limit, okay? So the limit of the f of x plus h minus f of x over h as h approaches 0 is equal to derivative of the function with respect to x. Yan. So that means ang ating f of x is the sine x, or y is equal to the function sine x. So that means ito yung ating f of x. Ang f of x natin is sine x. So what does that mean for our f of x plus h? It will be sine of x plus h. Okay, a matter of replacing our x with x plus h. So if we are to substitute that in our equation, so for f of x plus h, we're going to replace that by this one. So lipat natin siya dito. We will have sine of x plus h here. And for this one, we're going to replace that by sine x. So this becomes sine x. Okay? We know this is not sine of x plus sine h. It's not that, no? So we have a sine expansion for this, yung sine of a sum, yung general addition formula natin, sine of a sum of two angles sa ating trigonometry, that will be equal to, yung sine expansion natin is sine x cosine h plus cosine x sine h. Yan yung sine cos plus cosine. Yan yung sin cos cosine natin sa trigo. Minus this one. So yung subtrahin natin is still the minus sine x. Yan. So don't forget that we still the h, we still have the h on our denominator. Ayan. So notice that we can actually group our first term and the last term. Okay? Yan. So we can actually pair this with this one. And at the same time, separate this into fractions. Ayan, so we have sine x, pinactor out na natin. Then we have cosine h minus 1, considering the first and the last term. Ayan, so we have over h. Okay. Plus the other one, syempre we have a limit for this fraction as well. So that will become limit as h approaches 0 of cosine x sine h over h. Ayan. So we apply the property of limit. Limit of a sum is equal to the sum of their limits. Yan. Why did we do that? Kasi limit of a product is actually the product of two limits. So we can actually split this into a product of limits. So if we have the limit as h approaches 0, this expression becomes the limit as h approaches 0 and the limit as h approaches 0 of this also. We're familiar with that when we discuss the limit of trigonometric functions. Yan. So ito ay magiging 0 lang. You can review your limit of trigonometric functions. And this one is 1. Okay? So if that is 0, that means this product is 0. While this one, limit of cosine x times 1. But cosine of x, di ba wala naman dun yung variable natin na nag-approach sa 0. So we just leave this as cosine x times 1. Okay? Tapos dito, magwawala na. So, we just have to cancel this. And so, our answer will just be cosine x. Okie dokie. So, a matter of reviewing your limit properties and limit of trigonometric functions to be able to derive this formula. Now, we go to our next step. So, actually, the derivation of cosine x being equal to negative sine x is almost the same thing. So, now we proceed with the third one. Yan, so derivative ng tan x, bakit naging second squared x? So next question natin is, from our trigonometry again, that tangent x is equal to this quotient, sine x over cosine x. So that means we're going to apply the quotient rule of differentiation. So considering our numerator as our u, denominator is our v, yan. Our formula for the derivative of that fraction is v u prime, meaning denominator times derivative of the numerator, minus uv prime, meaning numerator times derivative of the denominator, all over the square of the denominator. Okay, so for shortcut purposes, we get our v squared first. Yan, so yun yung madali. Yan, remember to set up your fraction. Okay, so in derivative, we're applying the derivative already. Differentiation on both sides. So derivative of tangent x with respect to x, nilagay na natin yung v squared. Now for the vu prime and uv prime, kunin natin yung u prime. So that's derivative of sine x, that's cosine x. Yan, from our first two formulas. Derivative of cosine x, ano nga ba? Negative sine x. Okay? So, sabi dun sa mean one natin, it's v u prime or denominator times the derivative of the numerator. So, we have to multiply this. Ayan, so multiplying that will give you cosine squared x. Minus our second term or subtrahend will be this one. So uv prime will give you this product. So minus negative, that will give you positive sine squared x. And because you have minus negative sine squared x, minus will be plus. Okay? But remember, this is an identity in our trigonometry. This will give us 1. So what we now have is 1 over cosine squared x, which we can actually write. Remember, 1 over cosine is secant x. So since we're squaring that, this will be secant squared x. So that's it. That's how we derive the formula for the derivative of tangent x being equal to secant squared x. Okay? Now, let's proceed. So actually, the derivative of cotangent x being equal to negative cosecant squared x is almost the same thing. A matter of expressing cotangent x as cosine x over sine x. So quotient rule din po ito. Okay? Now what about for this one? Derivative of secant x. Why is it equal to tangent x times secant x or secant x times tan x? Okay? Derivative ng secant, bakit naging sectan or tan sec? Okay? Okay, so our strategy here will be to express secant x as 1 over cosine x. So if we remember from our trigonometry, di ba, we had this identity, secant x being equal to 1 over cosine x. Yan. But we can actually write secant x also as cosine x raised to negative 1. So we did an algebraic thing here by raising cosine x above. Yan. So pag tinaas natin siya, ma-raise na natin siya ngayon sa negative 1. We have to replace its exponent. Di ba, ang understood exponent niya dito is 1. So pag tinaas natin, magiging negative 1. So with this expression, that means we need to apply what we have in our differentiation rule as the chain rule. Yan. So sabi sa chain rule, we have to multiply the coefficient by the exponent, base raised to n minus 1, exponent minus 1, and then the derivative of the base. Yan. So since the understood coefficient of this is 1, yan, we can just bring down the exponent negative 1 here. So for our first factor, we have negative 1, and then the second factor coming from the base raised to exponent minus 1. Negative 1 minus 1 is negative 2. So that means we will have cosine x being raised to negative 2. And then the last factor will be the derivative of the base we just copied. So derivative of cosine x will be negative sine x. Okay? So with this negative exponent, we can actually write this on the denominator to make the exponent positive. So that will give us derivative of secant x with the denominator of cosine x being raised to the second power. And then we have negative 1 and negative sine x for the numerator. That will become positive already. Or actually, we can consider negative 1 here being multiplied by the negative 1 here, yung understood factor din dito or coefficient ng sine x. So negative 1 times negative 1 gives you positive 1. So, ayan. We can actually split this into two fractions. Magkakaroon tayo ng 1 over cosine x for the first factor. Since naka-square yan, that means the other factor or fraction will be sine x over cosine x. From our trigonometry, this fraction is equal to secant x, while this fraction is your tangent x. So that's it. That's how we derive the formula for the derivative of secant x being equal to the product secant x tan x. Yun. The derivative of cosecant being equal to negative cosecant and cotangent is almost the same thing. This time, our formula is presented instead of our simple x, it's now u. Yung mga angles natin is in u. So that means magkakaroon lang tayo ng other factor na du with respect to x or derivative of u with respect to x. Okay? So for example, if we have sine of 3x squared, our u here is 3x squared. So, ayun yung formula natin, di ba? So, following this formula, this is our u. We just have to copy it first here. So, may exposure ulit, see, 3x squared. So, that's cosine 3x squared. But this time, we have this extra factor. What is the derivative of this u with respect to x? So, that's why we need to take note of this angle here. Derivative is 6x. So, that's it. That product is the derivative of sine 3x squared. Okay? What about if we have cosine square root of x? Okay? This time, ang kailangan natin is negative sine u. Our u here is the square root of x. Ayan. So, negative sine square root of x following this formula. And then, to take care of this one, what is the derivative of u with respect to x? So, familiar tayo sa derivative dapat ng square root of x. Ayan. Ito yung 1 over 2 square root of x. Diba? Yan yung, this one is x to the 1/2. So, derivative is 1/2 x to the negative 1/2. Okay? So, ayun. Yung product niya will become the derivative of cosine square root of x. Okay? What about cotangent of sine x? Yan. So, ito yung formula natin for that. So, we follow this pattern. Yan. So, a matter of following your formula. That becomes negative cosecant squared times, negative cosecant squared of sine x, not times. This is not a product. Take note, this is not a product. That's cotangent of sine x. So, you have negative cosecant squared of sine x. And then, we should not forget differentiating that u, that angle with respect to x. And the derivative of sine x is cosine x. So, that's it. The product, this time we have two factors. This is your first factor. This is your second factor. Okay? Ayan. So, finally, this is your formula or list of formulas for the derivatives of trigonometric functions. Ayan. Enjoy differentiating!